We're continuing a series of interviews we do every 4 years, conversations with the candidates, specifically the 10 major party candidates for the 5 statewide executive offices of Governor, Secretary of State, Auditor, Treasurer, and this week, Attorney General. We're airing the interviews in the order that they were conducted, starting with the Democratic former Parma City Council member and now state representative from the 15th Ohio House District in Parma, Jeffrey Crossman.
I think Ohio deserves an attorney general that tells the truth, gets the law right, and actually holds people accountable.
On that note, I think you're speaking primarily of the House Bill 6 case, the federal racketeering case that was called the largest corruption scandal in state history when it was announced that the case was proceeding in the federal court. I'm wondering, though, what do you think a state AG can do about this? Because you've demanded that your opponent, incumbent Dave Yost, do more. You say he's dropped the ball. What do you think a state AG can do?
Well, first of all, it's a pattern with Dave Yost, right? He dropped the ball when it came to ECOT. No one's been held accountable. We haven't collected all the money that the state is owed for the fleecing of Ohio taxpayers over that issue. He was on his watch when that happened, and when he ran in 2018 for Attorney General, he promised he would hold people accountable. He did none of that. And then when the House Bill 6 nuclear bribery scandal came about, the largest in state's history, he's not issued any subpoenas as far as I can tell. He's not done any actual investigation. And I know he knows how to do that work. He did it against county commissioners and things when he was in the auditor's office. And he can refer those charges to local prosecutors to bring state charges. And they have jurisdiction. And they have the resources. And so for me, it's inexcusable to do so very little to protect Ohio taxpayers and to really root out the corruption that's been plaguing Ohio for the last 20 years.
So you don't think it's a hands-off because it's a federal case issue?
No, I think they have jurisdiction. I think that, by the way, he should say that if that's the case. I don't believe that's the case because he's never lifted a finger really to do anything about it. We saw that the PUCO was doing some limited investigations, which I thought were kind of bogus to begin with. I thought those should have been independent investigations, and you saw why. Greg Price was overseeing an investigation that he had participated in the activity. So when I called for the investigation a year ago, I called for an independent investigation, which Jennifer French said no to. So, we saw that the Fed said, put a pause on that one. But, the state hasn't done anything to fully investigate everything that's happened or root out the public corruption or even recommend changes in Ohio law to make sure this never happens again. You
and other Democrats are pushing this issue of a culture of corruption at the State House, and with House Bill 6 being a big part of that. You're actually doubling down on it, though, where other candidates are talking about it. You've actually asked for investigations. You've filed lawsuits. You've demanded the DeWine administration talk about what they knew and when, and also the PUCO and other people. But there are 2 current polls out. One's a Suffolk poll that shows only 4% of voters say corruption is the most important issue. And it hasn't even come up as an issue in the Emerson poll that's announced as we're shooting this on the previous Friday. So what makes you think this is an issue that will help you win? Well,
I don't talk about I don't talk about corruption itself all the time. I think it's important to bring up, even if it doesn't poll well, because it does have an economic impact on the state of Ohio. There's a study out of the state of Illinois that shows that corruption in that state, and Ohio is very similar, obviously, to Illinois, $500 million in adverse economic impact to their state, $10.6 billion over the 20-year study period that they did. So this is having real impact on the loss of population, the loss of jobs in our communities. So for political candidates to simply not talk about it, I think, is a waste. I think we really need to educate the voters, and this is the time to do it. So, we're talking about the issues that are important to voters or on their minds, but we're also talking about this because we think it's important.
The issue of abortion doesn't have a direct connection to some statewide offices. Democrats are, of course, making it a campaign issue. It appears to be driving some more younger voters and others to register to vote. You called on Dave Yost to resign over suggesting that a 10-year-old rape victim who went to Indiana for an abortion did not exist. This issue so potentially does impact the Attorney General's office. You, as Attorney General, could be called upon to defend laws that might be passed by the legislature, which will most likely be dominated by Republicans even after this election. How are you going to do that when your perspective is different from the perspective of the lawmakers who passed the legislation you're having to fight for?
Well, let me say this. First of all, point of clarification. I did not call on Dave Yost to resign. I thought he should apologize.
Other Democrats have called on
other Democrats have called on him to resign. And that's, within his own moral judgment whether he should, and that's up to the voters this fall, right? But yes, this issue of abortion is squarely on the ballot with respect to the AG's office. Dave Yost ran to court and implemented a 6-week abortion ban without notice to anybody the day the Dobbs decision went down. the Attorney General is going to be the person that actually reviews the ballot language when this ultimately makes it on the ballot, which I suspect that it will in the next year or two. So, and I don't trust Dave Yost, and I don't think anybody that supports abortion trusts him on this issue, obviously either. Look how he behaved on House Bill 6 when that repeal effort was on the books. He rejected the language, he delayed the language, and denied those folks the opportunity to collect the signatures they needed to get it on the ballot. So I expect him to be a complete obstacle to abortion rights in the state of Ohio.
How would you go to court, though, and defend, say, an abortion ban if the legislature comes back and passes a total abortion ban? How do you go and defend that when your perspective is different?
Well, there's pending litigation already. There's a court case pending in Hamilton County. Dave Yost is openly opposing that litigation, claiming that Ohio law does not protect women. And we've seen the impacts, by the way. We've seen the impacts. If you looked at the story that came out of Cleveland.com yesterday, they cited the affidavits that were presented in that case. Women with burst fallopian tubes, young girls, high school girls on suicide watch, other women that have to forego life-saving cancer treatments because of the state of Ohio law. There's been no clarification of Ohio law. So I would go to court and make sure there's clarification. There's clarity for physicians when they're performing this medical care in Ohio and what they can and cannot do under state law. And I also will provide information to Ohio voters or Ohio residents where they can get the care they need, whether it's in state or out of state. And I'll protect people's right to leave the state if that's where they have to go.
Even though this is a highly political issue, you would take that partisan stance?
I don't think it's political to say people have the right to travel outside of Ohio and get medical care. I don't think that's political. That's just, that's being human.
We in the media often call the Attorney General the state's top cop because you'd be in charge of law enforcement in the state. You were not endorsed by the Fraternal Order of Police, but neither was your opponent, Dave Yost. He was a prosecutor though, so I'm wondering, how do you build your credibility with law enforcement since you'd be in charge of them?
Well, I've met with the FOP and I met with the other police union, the OPBA, and I was very candid with them, and that, they're the law enforcement experts. I'm there to learn too, and I want to work with them to, come up with the right solutions that work for them and work for all of Ohio.
And how do you work with them when Democrats, for instance, have been proposing legislation that has been opposed by police officers? I mean, Republicans have too, but I'm thinking of some of the things that have happened recently on qualified immunity and things like that.
Well, the police in the state have made it clear that they feel like they have no home in any of these political parties. And I think it takes someone to step in between and be a bridge, not be a wedge. And I think, an open mind and an open heart and listening more than talking, I think that's going to go a long way in building credibility with the law enforcement community. Look, I've been working with the law enforcement community since I was on city council in Parma, Ohio. I've always supported the police and supported the work that they do, and I know my community does as well. So I'm here to listen, I'm here to work with folks, and I know I'm smart enough that I don't have all the answers and I have to listen to people.
Another big part of the Attorney General's office is the consumer protection arm, and in fact it may be the most active and most visible for many Ohioans. What do you do to make that office more transparent about the actions that you're taking, and what happens to all those funds that you would potentially recover? Where do those funds go? How do you tell people about that?
Well, that is a very important function, consumer protection in the state of Ohio. And you're absolutely right. Look at the legislative record I've had. I mean, it's all been about transparency and good government. So, I'm open to suggestions and ideas on how we can do a better job in making sure Ohioans have the comfort that the monies that are collected on their behalf are being used for the purposes that benefit Ohioans.
And is that an area that you think gets enough attention from attorneys general? I mean, for a lot of people, things like suing over robocalls and things like that are hugely important. Is that an area that gets enough attention, or is it potentially neglected?
I think it's a great question. I think a lot of the stuff that the good work that's being done is neglected, but that doesn't mean we should only focus on things that are going to get media attention. I think you have to do all the good work to protect Ohioans, and that's the role of the office.
Dave Yost has filed lawsuits against the Biden administration over what he calls overreach, specifically on the vaccine mandate that the federal government had, and also in the lawsuit now pending over school nutrition funding and investigations into claims of LGBTQ-based discrimination. Now, that issue of federal overreach is an important issue, though you have called on Yost to drop that lawsuit over the Title IX school funding discrimination case. What if that overreach is a Republican president overreaching? What about the issue of overreach? Don't you think it's important to define that as it terms states' rights versus what the federal government can do?
Well, first of all, these are case-by-case decisions, right? And filing a lawsuit to attack LGBTQ youth in this state is despicable. It's just despicable. Participating and wasting state tax dollars on lawsuits like trying to overturn the 2020 election in Pennsylvania has no bearing on what happens in Ohio. It's a waste of tax dollars. Dave Yost is nothing more than a political hack, and nothing says hack to me than filing lawsuits just because you want to have a political agenda. That's what those lawsuits have been about. They're not about protecting Ohioans. They're not about advancing the interests of Ohioans. They're all about advancing his personal political pursuits.
You'll likely need Republican votes to win in this state. So what do you want Republican voters to know about you?
Yeah, first of all, I'm not a wealthy person. I came from, just like them, I came from a working class community and worked and earned everything I have in life, and I know that's what most Ohioans have to do. And I think it's important to have people that understand the values of Ohio representing them. A lot of these issues that we talk about, I don't frame them in Republican versus Democrat frames. They're not right or left issues. A lot of these things are just right and wrong, and that's one of the reasons why I went after Larry Householder so hard. It wasn't a Republican or Democrat thing. We had Democrats saying, stay away from it too. But I thought it was too important for Ohio to stay away from it, which is why and that's how I'll run the office as well. What's right and what's wrong, and that's your true north.
You and the other Democrats in this race do have an issue, though, in that you are being significantly out fundraised by the Republican incumbents. How do you get that message out?
Well, we're crisscrossing Ohio. We're investing in a coordinated campaign along with other candidates, and we're relying on the people to know the candidates and know what we stand for and know what our values are. Not every candidate with the most money wins. We saw that in the primaries, and we're hoping that our message is resonating with voters because we've met with lots of them across the state of Ohio.